The photograph was taken at 4:47 p.m. on October 29th. I know because my Nikon still embeds the metadata, and because I remember the light, how it came through the oak canopy in these thin amber shafts that made the whole valley look like it was underwater. I remember setting the aperture to f/8, the ISO to 400, the way my breath fogged slightly in the sudden cold. I remember framing the shot, a stone foundation half swallowed by kudzu, a chimney standing alone like a rotted tooth, the mountains rising behind it in blue-gray layers. What I don't remember is the figure standing in the tree line. Not until I developed the negative 3 weeks later, standing in my apartment bathroom with the windows blacked out, the chemical trays lined up on the counter, the red safe light casting everything in the color of old blood. I rocked the developer tray for 90 seconds, lifted the film, watched the image resolve in the amber liquid, and there it was, 30 yards left of the chimney, between two birch trees, human-shaped, but wrong somehow, too thin, too still, and looking directly at the camera, or at me. I nearly dropped the negative. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the tray down. I told myself it was a smudge, a flaw in the emulsion, a trick of the developer, but I have 20 years of experience with darkroom work, and I know what a flaw looks like. This wasn't a flaw. This was something that had been there all along, something I hadn't seen when I pressed the shutter. I sat on the edge of my bathtub for an hour, the safe light humming, staring at that inverted image, the figure pale against dark trees, arms too long posture, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate but felt in my sternum like a cold finger pressing. And then I started thinking about the other photos, the ones I hadn't developed yet, the ones from that last morning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got there. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 34 years old, and until 6 months ago, I made my living shooting editorial wildlife photography for magazines you've probably heard of: National Geographic Traveler, Audubon, Outside. The kind of work that sounds romantic at dinner parties and pays just enough to keep you in used camera equipment and instant ramen. Then my wife left and the magazine folded, and I found myself with a lease I couldn't afford, a portfolio full of birds of prey, and a growing certainty that I needed to get out of the city before I did something permanent and stupid. I decided to take a trip. Not a vacation, those imply relaxation. This was a project. I was going to spend 2 weeks in the Appalachian backcountry, shooting the autumn migration, documenting the way the valleys filled with fog in late October, capturing something true about solitude that I could maybe sell to a gallery or use to convince myself I still had a reason to wake up. I chose a valley in western North Carolina that didn't have a name on any map I'd find. The Forest Service called it the Hollow in their paperwork. Local hunters avoided it. Something about the topography, steep walls, a single access point via an old logging road that hadn't seen maintenance since the 70s, a creek that ran milky white with limestone sediment. It was perfect. Remote, unphotographed, mine. I loaded my truck on a Sunday morning in late October. The weather was wrong from the start. Meteorologists were calling it a false spring, temperatures in the low 70s, humidity hanging in the air like a promise of rain that never came. I drove west with the windows down, smelling cut hay and diesel, listening to a podcast about mushroom foraging that I couldn't concentrate on. My mind kept going to the divorce papers still unsigned in my glove compartment, to the way Rachel had looked at me the last time we'd spoken, not angry, just exhausted, like I was a math problem she'd given up trying to solve. The logging road started about 12 miles past the last paved county route. I found it by GPS coordinates another photographer had posted on a forum 3 years ago, a guy who'd been looking for black bear dens and came back with stories about weird acoustics and old stone piles that nobody had followed up on. The road was worse than I'd expected, rutted, overgrown with autumn olive, branches scraping the sides of my Tacoma like fingernails. I drove for 40 minutes at 5 miles an hour, the truck tilting at angles that made my cooler slide across the back seat. When the road finally ended, it ended. No turnaround. Just a wall of rhododendron and a clearing barely wide enough to park. I sat there with the engine running, listening to the cooling metal tick, and felt the first real doubt. Not about the trip, about myself. about what I was trying to prove by coming to a place where, if I got hurt, nobody would find me for weeks. But the light was good. That golden, slanting autumn light that makes every photographer stupid with optimism. I turned off the engine and started unpacking. I set up camp about 300 yards from the truck, near the creek. The water moved fast over limestone shelves, making a sound like constant whispering. I pitched my tent on a flat shelf of rock, hung my food bag from a dogwood branch, and spent the remaining daylight walking the valley floor with my camera, shooting bracketed exposures of the light filtering through tulip poplars and sugar maples. The leaves were past peak, mostly brown and rust-colored, clinging to branches in clumps that fell with every gust of wind. By 6, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. The false spring was a lie, I realized. The real weather was moving in behind it, cold and fast. I built a small fire from deadfall, boiled water for dehydrated chili, and sat with my back to a boulder, watching the darkness fill the valley like ink poured into a bowl. That's when I noticed the silence. Not complete silence. The creek still whispered. Wind still moved through the canopy, but something was missing. No owls, no coyotes, no rustling in the underbrush that would indicate deer moving to water. I'd spent enough nights in the backcountry to know that forests are never actually quiet. There's always something, a nighthawk, a mouse in the leaf litter, bats clicking overhead. This valley had a hole in its sound, a frequency missing, and standing there by my fire, spooning lukewarm chili into my mouth, I felt the first true thread of unease. Not fear, just unease. The sense that I was somewhere that hadn't agreed to my presence. I told myself it was the topography. Steep walls, deadening acoustics. I finished eating, secured my food, and crawled into my tent with a headlamp and a paperback I didn't read. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to my own breathing, waiting for the silence to break. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke to fog. It had rolled in sometime after midnight, thick and white and cold, pressing against the tent fabric like a living thing. I could barely see the outline of my boots 3 feet away. The creek sounded muffled, distant. My watch said 6:15 a.m., but the light was wrong, diffuse, sourceless, the color of old porcelain. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into air that felt refrigerated. My breath plumed. The fog beaded on my jacket in droplets that ran cold down my wrists. I stood there for a long moment, camera in hand by instinct, and tried to orient myself. The valley had transformed overnight. Trees emerged from the white like shipwrecks, their branches dripping moisture. The ground was saturated, every leaf and stone gleaming. I couldn't see more than 15 feet in any direction. I should have packed up. That was the smart move. Fog like that and mountains like those can last for days, and I hadn't brought enough dry firewood to wait it out. But the light was extraordinary. The fog diffused everything into soft gradients, turned the remaining autumn leaves into glowing embers, made the whole valley look like a Chinese watercolor. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without shooting it. I packed a day bag with water, trail mix, my Nikon, and a topo map I'd printed from a USGS survey. The map showed the valley as a simple depression between 2 ridgelines, the creek running north to south. Nothing remarkable. But as I walked that morning, following the creek upstream, I started finding things the map didn't show. First, it was the stones, not natural formations stacked. Low walls, maybe knee-high, running in straight lines through the undergrowth. Old property boundaries, I thought at first. The Appalachians are full of forgotten homesteads, families that tried to farm the hollows in the 20s and 30s and gave up when the soil played out. But these walls were too uniform, too deliberate, and they led somewhere. I followed them for half a mile, the fog thinning and thickening in waves. The creek narrowed, running faster over exposed bedrock. The walls grew higher, became foundations. I found a well, stone-lined, capped with a rotted wooden cover that I didn't try to lift, then a cellar hole half filled with leaf drift, the timbers black with age, and then the chimney. It stood alone in a clearing, 20 feet of hand-laid stone, the mortar crumbling, but the structure intact. No house attached, no other ruins nearby. Just the chimney, rising from the fog like a monument. I raised my camera and took the shot, the one with the figure in the trees. I didn't see it then. I was focused on the composition, the balance of the vertical chimney against the horizontal ridges, the way the fog created depth layers. I bracketed 3 exposures, checked the histogram, moved left for a different angle. When I looked up from the camera, the tree line was empty, or seemed empty. I kept moving. The settlement, if that's what it was, spread wider than I'd expected. I found more foundations, what might have been a barn, a rusted iron stove half buried in moss. And then, at the northern edge of the clearing, I found the door. It was set into the hillside at a 45-degree angle, wooden planks reinforced with iron bands, the wood swollen and gray but still solid. A root cellar, I thought, or a storm shelter. The Appalachians have a history of both. But the iron was wrong. Too ornate. Too old. And there was a hasp on the outside, as if whatever was inside had been locked in, not out. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the rusted latch, telling myself not to open it. Every instinct I had, every rational, survival-based instinct said to walk away, to go back to my tent, to pack up and drive out while I still could. But the other instinct, the one that had made me a photographer, the one that couldn't stand an unopened door or an unanswered question, was stronger. I pulled the latch. The door opened with a sound like a bone-cracking stairs, wooden, rotted in places, descending into absolute darkness. The air that came up smelled of wet stone, old metal, and something else, something organic and sweet, like fruit left too long in a drawer. I clicked on my headlamp. The beam caught limestone walls, wooden supports, the stairs dropping 10 feet, then 20, then turning out of sight. I went down. The stairs ended in a chamber maybe 15 feet square. The walls were rough-cut stone, sweating moisture. The floor was packed earth. And in the center of the room, on a wooden table that looked older than the mountains themselves, was a radio. Not a modern radio, not a survivalist's emergency crank. A military field set, olive drab, with vacuum tubes glowing faintly behind a wire cage. The kind they used in Korea, maybe World War II. It was powered on. The dial was lit, and through the static, I could hear voices. Not clearly, never clearly. Just fragments, like tuning between stations. A woman's voice, mid-sentence. Told you not to take the ridge. Then a man's voice, distorted by interference. Temperature dropping, do you copy? Then static. Then a child's voice, high and thin. It's looking at me. I stood frozen, my headlamp beam trembling on the radio's face. The tubes pulsed. The static shifted, and for a moment, just a moment, I heard my own name. Elias. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, like someone confirming I was there. I stumbled backward. My shoulder hit the stone wall. The radio crackled, and the voices stopped, replaced by a single tone, a steady, middle-C hum that vibrated in my teeth. I turned and ran up the stairs, not caring about the rotted steps, not caring about the darkness. I burst through the door into the fog and gray light, gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't stop running until I reached the creek. Then I bent over, hands on my knees, and forced myself to breathe. The fog was thicker now. I couldn't see the chimney, couldn't see the settlement, just white, and the sound of water, and my own ragged breath. I told myself I'd imagined the name, the power of suggestion, the isolation. The radio was probably some survivalist's hobby project, picking up distant signals, and my brain had pattern-matched static into something familiar. Elias is an uncommon name. I couldn't have heard it. I didn't hear it. But I didn't go back to check. I found my way back to camp by following the creek downstream. The fog persisted, clinging to everything, turning the afternoon into twilight. I built a fire bigger than I needed, feeding it with deadfall until the flames reached chest-high, and sat with my back to the rock, camera in my lap, telling myself I was just cold. The temperature kept dropping. By 4 o'clock, my thermometer read 28 degrees. The fog began to freeze on the branches, coating them in white rime that glittered in the firelight. I put on every layer I had and still shivered. The false spring had been a setup, a trap door, and I'd walked right into it. I was debating whether to pack up in the dark or wait for morning when I heard the footsteps. They came from the direction of the settlement, slow, deliberate, crunching through the frozen leaf litter. Not animal footsteps, too regular, too heavy, human. One person walking with a slight drag, like someone limping or tired. I grabbed my headlamp but didn't turn it on. The fire was too bright anyway. It had ruined my night vision. I stood, peering into the fog, trying to locate the sound. The footsteps stopped, started again. Closer now. Maybe 50 yards. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small. "I'm camped here. I've got a fire going." Silence. Then the footsteps resumed, circling, moving to my left, toward the creek. I thought of the figure in the photograph I hadn't taken yet. I thought of the radio. I thought of Rachel, and how she'd said I never knew when to walk away from a bad situation. "I'm a photographer," I called, hating the quaver in my voice. "Just passing through, leaving in the morning." The footsteps stopped again. For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice came out of the fog, male, rough, with an accent I couldn't place. "Radio work?" I didn't understand. "What? Your radio, does it work?" "I don't have a radio," I said. "Just a phone. No signal here." The fog shifted. I thought I saw a shape, tall and thin, standing near the creek bank. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Need to call it in?" the voice said, closer now. "Storm coming, bad one. Need to call for extraction." "Are you lost?" I asked. "Are you with the Forest Service?" No answer. The footsteps started again, moving away, back toward the settlement. I stood by my fire, shaking, listening until the sound faded into the creek's whisper. I didn't sleep that night. I fed the fire until I ran out of wood, then sat in my tent with my knife in one hand and a can of bear spray in the other, listening to the ice form on the tent fly, listening to the silence that wasn't silence at all, but a held breath. Morning came gray and still. The fog had lifted slightly, enough to see the valley walls, their upper reaches lost in cloud. The temperature was 18 degrees. My water bottles were frozen solid. My breath hung in the air like smoke. I packed with shaking hands, not bothering with breakfast, stuffing my tent into its bag half folded, strapping everything to my pack in a mess of straps and buckles. I was going home. The project was over. I could come back in spring with a partner, with a satellite phone, with proper cold weather gear. This wasn't cowardice. This was survival. I shouldered my pack and started toward the truck, following the creek downstream, the way I'd come. The valley looked different in the hard light, starker, more exposed. The trees were bare now, the last leaves fallen overnight, their branches clicking in a wind I couldn't feel. I walked fast, not running, forcing myself to maintain a pace I could sustain. I found the truck in 20 minutes, or rather, I found where the truck should have been. The clearing was empty. The rhododendron wall was intact, but my Tacoma was gone. No tire tracks, no broken branches, just the flattened grass where it had sat, already stiff with frost. I stood there, pack heavy on my shoulders, and felt something break in my chest. Not metaphorically, a physical sensation like a rib cracking. I dropped the pack and ran to the spot, as if the truck might be invisible. As if I was dreaming, I wasn't. The grass was bent. A candy wrapper I dropped was still there, frozen to the ground. But the truck was gone. I checked my pockets. My keys were there. My phone, dead, no signal, but present. I hadn't driven it anywhere. I hadn't sleepwalked. I hadn't. "Looking for your ride?" I spun around. The voice came from the tree line, same as last night. A man stepped out, and my first thought was, rescue. He wore an orange vest over a camouflage jacket, a backpack with what looked like medical supplies, sturdy boots. A search and rescue volunteer, someone who knew these mountains, someone who could help. He was maybe 50, with a gray beard and eyes that didn't match his weathered face, too clear, too pale, the color of creek water over limestone. He carried a walking stick that looked like a stripped sapling, and he moved with the easy grace of someone who'd spent decades on steep ground. "Thank God," I said, and hated how relieved I sounded. "My truck's gone. I parked it right here yesterday. Someone must have stolen it?" He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Way out here, unlikely? Then where is it?" He shrugged, leaning on his stick. "Ground soft after the thaw. Maybe it rolled. Maybe you parked it farther up the road and forgot. Memory plays tricks in the hollow. I didn't forget. I parked it right here. I remember the candy wrapper." He looked at the wrapper, then at me, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite pity. Something more clinical. Like assessment. "You found the settlement," he said. It wasn't a question. How did you? Photographer. You were taking pictures. People always take pictures." He stepped closer. I could smell him now, wood smoke and something metallic like copper pennies. "Did you go inside, the cellar?" I didn't answer. My hand moved toward my pocket, toward the knife. "Easy," he said, raising one palm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help. But I need to know. Did you touch the radio?" "I opened the door," I said. "I saw the radio. I didn't touch it." He studied me for a long moment, his pale eyes moving over my face like he was reading something written there. Then he nodded, slowly. "Good. That's good. The radio's not for touching. It's just a recorder. Picks things up. The valley does that. Acoustics, like I said. Memory plays tricks." "Who are you?" I asked. "Name's Gareth. Volunteer rescue. We monitor the hollow. People get lost here. False springs, sudden freezes. The weather turns fast." He gestured up the valley. "I've got a cabin 2 miles north. Warm radio. That actually works. We can call for a ride, get you out before the next front hits." I should have said no. Every fiber of my being should have screamed no. But I was cold, exhausted, frightened, and my truck had vanished from a locked clearing in the middle of nowhere. I needed help. I needed to believe that help existed. 2 miles? I asked. Hour hike. Maybe less if we move fast. I looked at the empty clearing one more time. Then I picked up my pack and followed him. Gareth set a brutal pace. He moved like the slope was flat, his walking stick clicking against stone, never slipping on the ice-slick leaves. I struggled to keep up, my pack digging into my shoulders, my breath coming in painful gasps. The valley narrowed as we went north, the walls steepening, the creek dropping into a gorge that roared below us. We walked on a ledge maybe 3 feet wide with a 100-foot drop to the water. He didn't talk much. When I asked about the settlement, he said, "Old mining colony. Pre-Civil War. They dug for copper, found nothing, starved out. The radio. Amateur historian sets up old equipment. Likes the way the limestone carries signal." He didn't look back. Nothing dangerous, just eccentric. And my truck? Probably rolled, or you misremember. Stress does that. I wanted to believe him, but the ledge we were walking on hadn't existed on my map. The topo showed a gradual slope, not a cliff face. And the cabin, when we finally reached it after 90 minutes of scrambling, wasn't a cabin at all. It was a shack, plywood and tar paper half collapsed, with a wood stove venting through a hole in the roof. No radio antenna. No vehicle. No indication that anyone lived there or ever had. "This is your cabin?" I said, standing in the clearing, my hope curdling into something else. Gareth turned. He was sweating despite the cold, his pale eyes bright in his weathered face. "Warmth first. Then we figure out the truck." "I don't think." "You're cold. You're scared. You're not thinking straight." He smiled again, and this time I saw that his teeth were wrong. Too many of them, or too sharp, or just arranged in a way that didn't fit his gums. "Come inside. I'll make coffee, real coffee. Not that instant garbage." He pushed open the plywood door. The interior was dark, smelled of mildew and kerosene. I could see a cot, a stove, shelves lined with jars, and on the wall, pinned with rusted nails, were photographs. Dozens of them. Black and white, color, Polaroids, printed digital shots, all of the same valley, all of the same settlement, all of people standing by the chimney, people descending the stairs, people looking at cameras with expressions I can only describe as final. I recognized one of them, the forum poster. The guy who'd given me the GPS coordinates 3 years ago. "You're not rescue," I said. My voice was barely audible. Gareth stood in the doorway, blocking the light. I said I was a volunteer. I volunteer for lots of things. I ran. Not back the way we'd come, the ledge was too narrow and he was between me and it. I ran sideways into the trees, crashing through underbrush, my pack snagging on branches, my camera banging against my hip. I heard him shout something behind me, not angry, almost amused. Then his footsteps, unhurried, following. The forest closed in, the fog had returned, thicker than before, turning the world into a maze of white and gray. I ran blindly, no direction, just away. My ankle turned on a root. I fell, rolled, came up limping. The pain was distant, drowned by adrenaline. I kept moving. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. The light never changed. The fog kept the sun invisible, the day in permanent twilight. I crossed the creek at some point, wading through water so cold it burned, scrambling up the opposite bank. I found the old logging road, or what I thought was the road, and followed it until it ended in a wall of blowdowns that hadn't been there before. And then, impossibly, I found my truck. It was parked exactly where I'd left it, in the clearing. The candy wrapper still frozen to the ground. The doors were unlocked, the keys were in my pocket. But when I tried them, they worked. The engine turned over on the first try. I didn't question it. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove out of that valley with the gas pedal on the floor, branches scraping the paint, the truck bouncing in ruts deep enough to bottom out the suspension. I didn't stop until I reached paved road. I didn't stop again until I was 2 counties away, filling up at a gas station where the clerk looked at me like I was homeless, mud-caked, wild-eyed, speaking too fast about needing to call the police. The police listened, took my statement, sent 2 deputies to check the valley. They found the settlement, they said, found the cellar hole, the chimney, no radio, no shack, no Gareth. My truck had been reported abandoned on the logging road by a hunter 3 days before I claimed to have driven it out. They suggested I'd gotten disoriented, maybe hypothermic, maybe imagined things, maybe needed to talk to someone. I didn't argue. I went home. I developed the film. For Braujig. That brings me back to the bathroom. The red light. The negative in the amber tray. I developed all 36 exposures from that trip. Most were what I expected. The chimney, the fog, the creek, the settlement. Beautiful, haunting, useless. I couldn't look at them without seeing Gareth's smile, without hearing that radio hum. But the last roll, the one from the final morning, the morning after the shack, after the run through the woods, after finding the truck, there were 12 shots on that roll. I'd taken them automatically by reflex during my flight through the forest. I didn't remember taking them. But there they were. The first 8 were blurred, motion, panic, branches, sky. The 9th showed the creek, frozen at the edges, my own shadow falling across the ice. The 10th showed the logging road, the ruts, the Tacoma's hood. The 11th showed the truck's interior, the driver's seat, the steering wheel, and in the rearview mirror, barely visible, a shape in the back seat. Thin, pale, looking forward. I wasn't alone when I drove out. I know that now. I must have known it then on some level, because I remember suddenly, vividly, the feeling of being watched during that drive, the sense that something in the truck with me was breathing in a rhythm that didn't match my own. But it's the 12th photograph that I keep coming back to, the last frame on the roll. The one I took without looking, my finger on the shutter as I stumbled toward the truck, as I reached for the door handle. It shows the clearing, the truck, and standing beside the driver's side door, one hand on the handle, looking directly at the camera with those pale creek water eyes, is Gareth. He's smiling, and in his other hand, He's holding my house key. I moved 3 weeks after developing those photos. New city, new apartment, new locks. I threw away my cameras, all of them, even the Nikon I'd had since college. I couldn't look through a viewfinder without seeing that figure in the tree line, without wondering what else I was missing. The police never found anything. The valley is still there, still unmarked on most maps. I check the forums sometimes looking for other photographers who might have gone there. There are none. The original post with the GPS coordinates was deleted 2 days after I returned. The user account was abandoned. I work in a grocery store now. Night stock. I don't take pictures anymore. I don't go into the woods. I keep my blinds closed. But last night at 3:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Because I'm still stupid, because some part of me still needs to know. Static, then a voice, not Gareth's, a woman's. Faint, distorted, like coming from a great distance. Ilias, she said. The temperature's dropping. Do you copy? I hung up. I sat in the dark until morning. And this morning when I went to check the locks, I found something wedged in my doorframe. A photograph, printed on matted paper, black and white. It shows me asleep in this apartment, in my bed, taken from the footboard. The timestamp in the corner reads 4:47 a.m. The same time I took the photograph of the chimney. The same time the figure was standing in the trees. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do, because maybe if someone reads it, they'll understand. Or maybe they'll go to that valley, and they'll find the radio, and they'll hear their own name in the static, and they'll realize what I realized too late. The hollow doesn't keep you. It just makes copies. And the copies come home.